This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have #1 New York Times bestselling author Douglas Preston here to talk about his new release, Extinction. Welcome, Douglas.
Well, thank you, Marie.
I am so excited. I've promised not to fangirl or drool or do any of that because your body of work, both on the nonfiction and fiction side, has been so amazing and so rewarding for individuals, for humanity in terms of the things that you've studied, that you've brought to light. But before I get crazy, can you start us off with an overview of what the story is about?
I'll tell you about the origin of the idea. I often write nonfiction pieces for the New Yorker magazine on science subjects. And I came across this really interesting company called Colossal, founded by a geneticist at Harvard Medical School, which is engaging in de-extincting Pleistocene mammals. And their big one is they're working on de-extincting the woolly mammoth. And I thought this would make a really fascinating nonfiction piece. So I started researching it, and then I quickly realized that every science journalist in the country was chasing this story. But as I was doing the research, I read the book by this geneticist named George Church. And in it is a passage which is absolutely crazy and chilling. I can't tell you what it is because it kind of spoils the story. But I read that and I thought, oh my God, here is a novel. And this is not science fiction. This is science fact. This is something we are all going to see. And that's how Extinction got started.
Well, it's fascinating because we in our own lives have seen some of that with the news recently about the dire wolves.
Well, that's right. In fact, that's the company, Colossal, has just resurrected the dire wolf. Now there's some controversy. Is it a pure dire wolf or what did they do? You know, these de-extinctions are not absolutely pure. They're kind of a mix, but they're extraordinary genetic manipulation. The dire wolf is just the beginning. They probably are about 5 years away from de-extincting the woolly mammoth. And that is going to be absolutely incredible. This is so funny. They've already taken the genes that make the woolly mammoth woolly, that give it hair, and they put it in a mouse and they created a hairy mouse, a really hairy mouse. They're starting with an Indian elephant, which is the closest relative to the woolly mammoth, but they've sequenced the genome. They've got technologies that they're using, and probably within 5 years, we will be seeing baby woolly mammoths in a zoo or some kind of setting. Now, Colossal did have an arrangement with a Russian billionaire to turn their Pleistocene de-extincted animals loose on the Siberian tundra. This guy controlled 800,000 acres of Siberia. But of course, with the Ukraine war, that project fell by the wayside. So I thought, well, look, this is going to happen in our lifetime, even in my lifetime, and I'm not that young. So I had the idea that, okay, they've recreated some of these Pleistocene animals in the Colorado mountains. These are cold weather animals that survive well in winter environments, cold, high altitude environments. And it's become sort of like a Jurassic Park, although I have to warn you, this book is nothing like Jurassic Park. But it does open with this resort called Erebus, where they've got beautiful woolly mammoths. They've got Irish elk that they've de-extincted and a couple of other peaceful, non-violent, vegetarian Pleistocene animals, nothing like Tyrannosaurus Rex, that then visitors can come and see. And we have two main characters in the novel, Sheriff James Colcord, who's the sheriff of Eagle County, the elected sheriff of Eagle County, Colorado, and an agent with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation named Frankie Cash. And these two team up to solve this bizarre murder, double murder that takes place at this Erebus resort where they have these de-extincted animals, where two honeymooners on a backpacking trip into the backcountry are murdered and apparently decapitated, and their bodies are taken off. Clearly not by animals, right? So that's where the book opens up, with this horrific double murder and just an enormous pool of blood on the ground, which they determine nobody could have survived that kind of loss of blood. So then the sheriff and the CBI investigator are in charge of trying to figure out what happened and track down the killers.
And it's a marvelous setup. The way that you introduced that opening scene, I remember finishing the last word of that chapter and saying, oh my goodness, what is coming next? I was so there with each of those characters. I was in that setting so firmly and could empathize with them so well, what they were living through in a very short span of time. You just beautifully set up those characters and drew us in so well to care so much.
Well, thank you very much. I do feel it's important as a novelist to really recreate the setting as vividly as possible. Because even though it's a novel, the reader can tell when you know what you're talking about or don't know what you're talking about. I spent just about my whole life in the Colorado mountains.
And it's an amazing setting. Not only is your writing always so beautiful and cinematic, but having gone and had my first trip to Colorado just last month with Left Coast Crime, I had the opportunity to go into the Front Range, which you mentioned as folks are traveling back and forth, and go by Dinosaur Ridge and get a sense of just how much dinosaur history we've uncovered in that location. So I thought it was just amazing, because not only did you give us the environment that these creatures would have needed, but you gave us that tie to where we can go find them today. So it was just so much fun in that way. I loved it.
Well, thank you. Colorado is just a wonderful setting. I mean, the mountains of Colorado, the huge wilderness areas, all the 14ers there. I've climbed 14ers from time to time. And so I really love Colorado. It makes for a wonderful setting. I mean, I live in New Mexico. It's only the state next door, but I spent a lot of time backpacking and climbing in Colorado. And it's just a wonderful setting. And these horrific murders taking place in this gorgeous environment. It's that sort of dissonance that I think drives the story forward.
It really does. And from there, you give us so many pieces to contend with, really the artistry that's required. You set us around creatures that we're close to getting to, but we're still not there, other than in movies and in books and in our imaginations. And having that almost fantastical, magical element against the very real science of forensics and crime detection, it was interwoven so beautifully.
Well, thank you. I have done quite a bit of writing for the New Yorker magazine, and one of the pieces I wrote was about David Reich, who's a geneticist at Harvard Medical School, not involved with Colossal, but he's creating an encyclopedia of ancient DNA. His lab has sequenced the DNA of over 10,000 people who lived thousands of years ago, ancient Romans, people from India, bones that were discovered that are thousands of years old. And he's creating sort of a library of human genetic relationships. And it's extremely interesting because it's showing that our human past, is a whole lot more complicated than we thought. And people have been moving around the world a lot more vigorously, back and forth, and migrating and so forth, much more than we imagined. And it's a really interesting project. And that sort of is another, that information works its way into the novel. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like a novel is loaded down with this science, but there's a lot of really interesting science in the novel which is all absolutely real and cutting edge. It's woven into the story, I think, in a kind of an exciting way.
Well, I absolutely loved it. I kind of think about it like silk work. When a tailor is working with silk, you have to have those very fine needles, and you use the finest needle and the finest thread, because we never lost the propulsive elements of the story. We never lost the mystery elements that are driving the story. Character, all of those things never were sacrificed. It was always information you needed. You were dying to get the next words, whether it was coming from scientists, whether it was coming from law enforcement, wherever it was coming. It was so important and just came together so beautifully in this story.
Well, thank you. I like that metaphor. I might steal that from you.
You are more than welcome. Now, something I kind of mentioned before was the word empathy. And I was curious, you have written so extensively, again, in nonfiction and in fiction, and you've been looking at human beings in a lot of ways, especially when you're writing characters and what do humans do and why do we do it? What are your thoughts about empathy? Because we teach our children to have empathy. Is it good or is it bad?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, of course, that does come up in the novel, and I can't really say why or how. But the fact is that empathy is a very interesting human trait. I mean, they've studied chimpanzees, and chimpanzees are very like humans. But chimpanzees, one of the characteristics that they don't have is empathy, or they don't have it in the way we do, which is enormous. Now, evolutionary biologists tell us that empathy is something that is a very important aspect of our evolution because what empathy really is our ability to understand how another person is feeling, what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And now that is important, a good perspective, but it's also very important in dealing with violence and conflict. It's like Sun Tzu, it said, in war, know your enemy. And empathy is how we know our enemy, how we know what they're thinking, how we can anticipate how they're going to react, and how we can defeat them. So empathy is actually a very important component in human conflict, as well as being an important component in human relations. Because, of course, we're a species that knows conflict. Violence is a very deep and important part of our evolutionary history, unfortunately. But we carry that baggage around with us. We've learned how to cooperate with each other in groups, but we have the ability to cooperate intra-group, but we have this ability to look on those in another group as being inhuman. We dehumanize them. I mean, the Russians are dehumanizing the Chinese, whatever. I mean, I'm not, excusing anyone's behavior, but I'm saying that this is what we do in conflict is we dehumanize the other. And it really is a problem in our species. And that problem manifests itself in the novel Extinction, but I can't say how.
Well, I think it's really pivotal how you brought out, because we can use empathy in wartime application. I really never thought about how empathy could be manipulated until you brought it up. And I think that's one of those unique things about the human species when we look at, as you said, the need to other, going to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Group identification is really important to us, and how that strength of empathy can be used and manipulated to subdue or subvert people or ideas is really, really kind of a sad thing. We start to look at power and how humans wield power. And I wanted to ask you about that too. It seems like we're not always good with the tools and the technology that we have. And I was curious, should we be playing with DNA? Should we be playing God with bringing species back to an Earth that has changed substantially from what they had evolved and they were suited to exist in?
Well, that's a very deep question, and it really it encompasses all our technology. It's like E.O. Wilson said we are a species with Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, and that is very dangerous. And I think that's really true. We are headed to a place that I don't know where we're going. I mean, we now have the ability to take, I mean, this is one of the things that George Church writes about in his book. We now have the technology to genetically manipulate the human species along lines that nature never intended. We can make ourselves smarter, better. We're at the cusp of being able to do this. Bigger, stronger, prettier, smarter, better in whatever way you want. And parents want their children to be the best. And that's a very powerful motive for them to use genetic manipulation to make their children better. I mean, who wouldn't want your child to be smarter, faster, stronger, more successful, and all the rest of it? I mean, this is a really dangerous road to go down because we're taking over evolution from nature and arrogating it to ourselves. And who's going to be making these decisions as to what's good and what isn't good? I mean, it really is a terrifying prospect, but we're there now. We're going to have to face this. That, along with artificial intelligence, along with the nuclear bomb, along with our weapons, and we're also entering an era of potential biological weaponry that could be as dangerous as the hydrogen bomb, or even more so. I mean, so as a species, we're entering an era where our godlike technology could very easily destroy us. It is just as E.O. Wilson said, it is extremely dangerous.
As I was reading this story, like I said before, it's so cinematic, it's so propulsive, it's all of those things we want in entertainment. But it's also this serious confrontation with who we are and, as you said, where we're going. Earlier, you mentioned woolly mice. Do we need woolly mice? Do the mice want to be woolly? That may be a silly, small, insignificant way of looking at it, but you can easily extrapolate that out into all of the other applications of how that gets dangerous, how that gets scary. And it just makes you wonder if maybe Gene Roddenberry was right. Maybe we need like a global group who's overseeing the planet saying, a few rules here and there wouldn't be a bad thing if we all got on the same page.
That is always appealing, but the problem is this global group, who are they going to be and what kind of decisions are they going to make? But I mean, the problem with science is that when human beings have acquired the ability to do something technologically or scientifically, they have always done it. They have never refrained from doing something that they could do. I mean, a perfect example is the atomic bomb. As soon as we understood that splitting the atom released tremendous amounts of energy, the very first thing we did was build a bomb. And the people who built the bomb, people like Oppenheimer, these were good people. These were not mad scientists or bad people, but they did it. Human beings have never refrained from doing something that they could do. And I just don't ever see that changing. So as our technology becomes more powerful, we are going to do those things. And right now, we have the ability to genetically manipulate our species. And I have no doubt that it is being done somewhere in North Korea, Russia, China, maybe even in the United States. Scientists are doing it. It's not even really clearly against the law to do that. So we are entering an era of great danger and possibility as well. Who knows? The human species is capable of the most beautiful, the most wonderful, and spectacular things, and is also capable of the most terrible depravity and violence. I mean, we are just at both ends of the spectrum. So which way are we going to go? Well, I don't know.
It's a very good question. One that can fill you with, as you said, wonder because of all the possibilities, or abject fear because of all of the terror. But at the same time, it makes me wonder if perhaps one of our greatest flaws as a species. We do have the ability to invent and come up with wonderful technologies, but perhaps one of our greatest flaws is what a lot of religions around the world try to grapple with, which is acceptance. We don't like loss. We don't like pain. And whether it's accepting the loss of someone we care about, ourselves, our own lives, or a species that died out thousands of years ago, we don't like to accept things, I think.
We don't like that. And we're also a very curious species. That's one of our most wonderful traits is curiosity. But it's curiosity, bringing back the woolly mammoth is partly out of curiosity. Wouldn't it be interesting to see that? But curiosity is a dangerous thing as well.
I guess we have to be grateful to folks like you who get us to think about these things. And since we can never come up with the why are we here? Why are we alive? We want to answer all the other questions. We want, like you said, we don't like anything hanging out there.
No, we don't. I mean, we now know we live in a huge universe. I mean, it is so big, it's beyond comprehension. And you have to ask yourself, okay, what is it all about? Why are we here? Where are we going? I mean, it's not senseless in my view, but it may be beyond human comprehension.
And again, that comes back to acceptance. Can we accept that certain things we might not get the answer to, at least on this plane, or however it all turns out, since none of us knows in the end? One thing I do want to say, I want to thank you so much for the joy you have brought to so many people. And I also have to ask you, because you have the unique ability to have sat back and analyzed some of these great questions or historical facts or scientific facts of our time, but you've also been out in the field and you've had the chance to actually go out and look at things. I'm referring to Nicaragua in particular. Where do you think we find the best answers? Is it in a library or is it out in the field?
Well, I do think it's out in the field. I really think that in writing nonfiction, there are many great nonfiction books out there that have just been written by people who were in a library. And they're interesting books to read, but you can't understand human beings, why they do what they do, how they did it, why they succeeded or failed, without getting out there and experiencing what they experienced. You know, I wrote a book about Coronado's expedition looking for the 7 cities of gold in 1540 to 42, really the first European exploration of the American Southwest. And I got on a horse and rode 1,000 miles retracing Coronado's route and almost killed myself. But I could never have understood that expedition and who he was without having done that. Otherwise, I'm just reading reports in libraries and books. And yeah, that's important to do that. I don't dismiss that, but to get out there on a horse and almost die of thirst and almost kill yourself and bite down on the grit and the dust and experience the heat, that was very important to understanding that first contact between Europeans and Native Americans and what would become our country. And that book, by the way, is called Cities of Gold. That was my second nonfiction book, and I'm still very proud of that.
Well, again, I am just so grateful that whether it was science evolution, that your left brain and your right brain met up so well that you can give us the nonfiction, you can give us the fiction, both at extremely high levels. So whether it was fate, whether it was just good genes from your parents, I'm grateful for it.
Well, thank you, Marie. It's good to talk to you.
You too. Now, last question. You have fans, many of which have been your fans for decades, like me. Where is the best place for existing fans and future fans to find you?
Well, the best thing to do is to go to our website, prestonchild.com, and sign up for my newsletter, our newsletter. We only send one newsletter a month. So if you give us your email address, you are not going to get bombarded like they do with 5 emails a day. Just one newsletter a month where we really, I or my writing partner, Lincoln, really talk about cool stuff to entertain you. We're not trying to sell you books, by the way. So that's what I'd recommend. That's that's where you can really meet us. And also you can email us from the website as well.
I am certain that everyone's going to want to go sign up because everything that you're thinking about is things that we all want to be thinking about in some way, shape, or form. Thank you again so much, Douglas. Again, the book is Extinction. If you are looking for that epic moment in your life where you find that great book that brings all the questions you've been thinking about in the back of your head since you were a little kid together with an amazing propulsive story, this is your read.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.